In this video, we're going to discuss authorship. The main advice on authorship is to think about the authorship before you write the paper. Especially if you're the person drafting the paper. Think about who is going to get authorship. Think about what the order will be. Go through that with the team so that everybody is on the same page and nobody feels slighted later on. There are 2 questions that you have to answer with authorship. First of all, who gets authorship? Who are you going to include as an author on your paper? According to the International Committee of Medical Journal Editors' recommendation, authorship should be based on the following 4 criteria. First, the author must be someone who has substantial contributions to the conception or design of the work, or the acquisition, analysis, or interpretation of data for the work. Second, the author must be involved in the drafting the work, or revising it critically for important intellectual content. Third, the author must give final approval of the version to be published. And finally, the author must agree to be accountable for all aspects of the work and ensuring that questions related to the accuracy or integrity of any part of the work are appropriately investigated and resolved. The main criterion here is that if you are an author listed on the paper, then you are taking public responsibility for its content. That's a high bar. It means that if later, the paper is found to have a problem, if it's found to have fraud, if it's retracted, you are responsible. You are liable for those transgressions. And that is going to reflect badly on you. So, if you are not the primary author of the paper, before you accept co-authorship, ask yourself the question as to whether you want to take that level of responsibility. Do you really understand the ins and outs of the paper well enough? You have to decide whether you have been sufficiently involved with its content to feel that you can take public responsibility. If you're the one writing the paper and trying to decide on authors, keep in mind that most people don't want to be included on your paper unless they have been fully involved. You can always put them in the acknowledgement section if you think that they have assisted in part of the study, but not sufficiently involved to qualify them to be co-author. There is also the issue of order. What order will the authors appear in? In general, order implies the author's relative contributions. The first author is usually the person who wrote up the draft of the paper, might have been the person who collected all the data, often a graduate student or a junior person. And the last position is usually the senior author, the head of the lab or research team, or the senior person who oversaw the research. That's a position of stature as well. Sometimes you'll have dual first authors, if maybe 2 graduate students worked on it together equally. In between the first and last positions, you should put everyone else in their order of their contributions. If it's not clear if the rest of the authors contributed equally without much differentiation, you could consider putting them in alphabetical order or even reverse alphabetical order. And sometimes you get these large working groups with lots and lots of people in international collaborations. Those large working groups can be cited as a group because they often comprise hundreds of authors. Papers also have an acknowledgement section. That's where you are going to cite any funding sources. If you're a graduate student who is on a certain fellowship, make sure you cite your funding source there. If it was a grant-funded study, you're going to mention the grant there. This is also a good place to acknowledge people who you don't feel merit authorship, and who probably don't want to be authors on the paper, but maybe they gave you some materials, or they offered some statistical consulting, or some other advice. It's a way to acknowledge those people without making them take on the role of author. There is also an ethical issues of ghost authorship and guest authorship. This is a hot topic particularly in the medical literature. It's been written about in the New York Times, and it's had some pretty profound influence on the medical literature. It's important that you are aware of these practices. Obviously, they are to be avoided when it comes to authorship. A ghost author is a professional writer who usually accompany hires to draft a manuscript. At the end of the day, the writer is not listed as an author on the manuscript, though they may have written the whole paper. Hence the term, ghost authorship. There's nothing wrong with professional writers being involved in the writing process. Scientists can certainly use the help of writers, but it's the lack of transparency that's the problem here. The related type of authorship is guest authorship, or sometimes called honorary authorship. This is when a company does a study, analyzes the data, draws their conclusions, drafts the paper, then they call or email an academic researcher at a prestigious university and invite them to be an author. That academic researcher certainly can't take public responsibility for the study. But they're often willing to lend their name, because drug company studies are often large, high-quality clinical trials that get published in great journals, and this goes on the academic's resume. The drug company meanwhile gets to bolster their paper's credibility by leading researchers to believe that an outside independent unbiased expert was a driving force in the study. Obviously, this is misleading if in fact the academic was only minimally involved and is simply lending their name and their institution's name to the paper. It's unclear how common these types of unethical authorship practices are in the literature. But a study in the British Medical Journal in 2011 that surveyed top medical journals found evidence of honorary or guest authorship in 17.6% of papers, and evidence of ghost authorship in 7.6% of papers. So at least in 2011, this practice was fairly pervasive. If you're interested in learning more about this, the medical community learned a lot about this practice because of litigation surrounding the drug Vioxx. Merck was being sued over the drug Vioxx, which was found to increase the risk of heart attacks. Because of the court trials, internal company documents entered the public domain. And there's a fascinating article in JAMA from 2008, where some researchers systematically reviewed 250 court documents related to published clinical trial and published review papers. What they found was shocking. The researchers reviewed emails and other documents related to 24 clinical trial papers that Merck was involved with. Here's what they found. Documents were found describing Merck employees working either independently or in collaboration with medical publishing companies to prepare manuscripts and subsequently recruiting external academically affiliated investigators to be authors. Recruited authors were frequently placed in the first and second positions of the authorship list. The use of guest or honorary authorship was an accepted practice at Merck apparently. They also looked at 72 review papers that the company was involved in publishing. They found that Merck marketing employees developing plans for manuscripts, contracting with medical publishing companies to ghostwrite manuscripts, and recruiting external, academically affiliated investigators to be authors. Recruited authors were commonly the sole author on the manuscript, and offered honoraria for their participation. Only half of the review articles even disclosed that Merck had sponsored those papers. That's quite insidious. You can see that this could have profound impact on the medical literature. Merck could actually put this whole set of opinions and perspectives out in the medical literature with it having the stamp of coming from an academic institution, when it really came from the drug company marketing people. You can see why this has been such a hot issue. Just to give you an idea, this is an actual internal company email that was made public during the court trial. It shows you how blatant this practice is. The company writes to the potential guest author, "I would like to invite you to be an author on the abstract and manuscript for this study. We are currently preparing both for submission before the end of this year. Could you please let me know if you would be interested in authorship on both the abstract and manuscript, one of the two planned publications, or none? In making your decision, you may want to take into consideration that the results of this study were negative at first glance." Basically, the company is giving out authorship like a gift. And they're allowing the researcher to choose whether or not they want to accept this gift based on how the study results happen to come out. Clearly, the author being invited here has no basis for taking public responsibility for the content of these articles. Obviously, this researcher was not heavily involved in the analysis, because the analysis is already done, or the writing of the paper, it's already being drafted. This is a clear case of guest authorship. And the trial turned up many emails like this that made it obvious as to what was going on. In summary, naming authors on a scientific paper ensures that the appropriate individuals get credit and are accountable for the research. Deliberately misrepresenting a scientist's relationship to their work is considered to be a form of misconduct, that undermines confidence in the reporting of the work itself.